So it's really late at night and I ended up falling asleep at like 5 p.m. and woke up like at 10 p.m. So it's the middle of the night, it's almost 2 in the morning and I'm bright and wide awake. And something you kind of do when it's extremely late at night like this and you're hyper thinking and focusing on certain things that you regret in life or whatever. One thing I was kind of thinking about is things that I never got to bring up in my many mbav videos that I may or may not talk about in the future. More likely than not I won't. And I figured, hey, while I'm thinking of these right now, maybe I'll just turn on my camera and start talking and stop talking when the camera dies. So yes, here we are talking about things. mbav related things that I should have mentioned already in previous videos of mine, but I haven't. Am I like really dark? Is it really dark? Because I have 2 screens on behind me. So yeah, one of the big main things that I really should have mentioned that I for some reason have not has been the broadcast versus production order of the episodes. So the thing about My Babysitter's a Vampire that makes it different from other TV shows, especially the ones that aired on Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, is the fact that it is a more serialized show than those other ones. And what's wild is that on streaming services like Netflix, more often than not, actually majority of the time, the order of the episodes of the TV show are in production order rather than broadcast order. And for shows like iCarly or Victorious, that's no big deal because those are episodic shows that are only lightly serialized. But for a show like mbav, where it is a majority serialized with slightly episodic elements, that means just randomizing essentially the order of the episodes is really wacky and probably not advised. From a story perspective, it may or may not be that big of a deal, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Now, there is an error that has come up that certain mbav archaeologists like myself, I like to consider at least, archaeologists like me and my friend Anakin, who was my research assistant on my most recent mbav video, things that we have gotten wrong when trying to dig up the past and trying to make our own conclusions and not coming to the right conclusion and only in retrospect starting to realize what the mistakes were. One opinion that I was flat out wrong about was the idea that mbav aired differently in Teletoon than it did on Disney Channel. That the episodes aired in different orders based on the different networks, and that, as far as I'm aware, is not true. There is the production order and then there is the broadcast order, and the broadcast order is how it aired on both Disney Channel and Teletoon. But when the show got added to Netflix, and for the essentially 9 years that it was on Netflix for, it was always in production order, which is the case for most sitcoms. But like I've said already, mbav is not a sitcom, it is an action-adventure comedy. So this is a fundamental flaw, this is an issue. In reality, the differences between season 1 and season 2 are the most apparent in this case. I would argue that season 1 is a lot more leaning on the action-adventure and sort of like Goosebumps kind of children's horror element of things, more than the second season is, and more than the movie is. I mean, there are outright elements of horror, of children's horror that are present in the first season that I would say are not present in the second season at all. It's more likely than not that I'll never see the Chucky movies ever, at least without having to take 15-minute breaks every 30 minutes or so, because of the Guys and Dolls episode where Debbie Dazzle is crawling up the stairs with a broken leg and a half ripped off face. I think that was a fundamental trauma point in my childhood that I'll never be able to cure. Because yeah, this show did outright scar some people, but I would say that's not the case for season 2. Season 2 leans a lot more on the teen melodrama of things, kind of trying to stylistically be more similar maybe to shows like Vampire Diaries or True Blood. I don't know, I've never seen that show before. But I think the storyline and how they tell the story throughout the episodes also changes between seasons, and that's why this little mini rant goes back to my original point about broadcast versus production. This might be considered a hot take, and my fellow mbav mutuals can let me know in the comments below or message me on Discord or whatever, but it is my opinion that the story makes the most sense in broadcast order for season 1, but makes the most sense in production order for season 2. The production order of season 2 is a little bit more flawed though, because Flushed and Jockenstein are right next to each other, which makes no sense because Flushed is like the summer beach party episode and Jockenstein is like the winter episode. So in production order, they're right next to each other because they were filmed back to back. They have, the sequential season order number. But in broadcast order, Jockenstein is much, much later in the season than it is in the production order, which makes sense. It makes sense because as far as we're aware, timeline-wise, season 2 begins at the start of a new semester of school. So it would make sense that things are still kind of summery and warm, which is when Flushed airs. But then as the season goes on, it becomes winter. And it gets colder, and there are episodes where like it being cold isn't a plot line, but you can tell that it is cold because they were filming when it was cold. The Mummy episode comes to mind, Hati-Hotep, and that is around the same time that Jockenstein is aired in the broadcast order. So like small fundamental things like that are different, but storyline-wise, it's a bit screwy at the end of the season. I mean, obviously, the Day-to-Wandle dates part 1 and 2 are next to each other, but as far as I'm aware, it makes the most sense story-wise that Halloween is before Independence Days, and that is not the case in broadcast order. I'm pretty sure Independence Days is like pretty early on, like near the middle to back half of the season, and then Halloween is the episode before the two-parter. And that makes no sense to me. It makes the most sense for Independence Days to be like the leading story that leads you into the two-parter. And because that's how they did it production-wise. But the reason why they probably shuffled that around a bit for the broadcast order is because the show ended in season 2 in October on Teletoon in 2012, and so it makes sense that like the Halloween episode would air in October because then immediately after, the two-parter aired. So yeah, like it makes the most sense from a logistic standpoint why Halloween is like so late. But I still think that they could have put Independence Days in between the Halloween episode and the finale to, make the story make more sense. And the reason why the story makes the most sense in broadcast order for season 1 is because just like little background things. Like, for example, in the episode that is supposed to air immediately after the Doug Falconhawk episode, you can see on the chalkboard behind them that, like, Doug was here was written. But in the production order, that episode is still later in the season. It does appear after the Doug Falconhawk episode, but it is not the immediate episode after. Also, episodes like Blood Drive are more earlier on in the season. The first 2 episodes, Lawn of the Dead and 3 Cheers for Evil, are still the first 2 episodes, but then immediately after that you get Blood Drive, and that is such a banger of a trio of episodes. Like, that will solidify whether you like or dislike the show, is watching those 3 episodes right next to each other. But production-wise, Blood Drive was the 5th episode, and I still think that's a perfectly fine way to watch the show. Like, personally, I've always watched the show in production order because, I always watched it on Netflix originally. Honestly, I would argue that 90% of the people who have seen My Babysitter's a Vampire watched it on either Disney Channel or Netflix. And that's still, like, giving a lot of credit to the fact that 10% of people watched it on Teletoon. There's no way... the percentage is probably even smaller, like probably 5% of people actually watched it on Teletoon in Canada. Because it was a bomb in Canada. No one watched it in Canada. And that's just purely because it aired on a Cartoon Network. Pun intended. That kind of leads into my next point, which is the fact that, like, it is a real travesty that My Babysitter's Vampire is not available to watch anywhere legally right now on any sort of streaming service. Specifically, season 2 is becoming more and more obscure because there are pretty much no DVD copies of the show that exist that are not bootlegs. There are bootlegs out there, and watch out for them, guys, because they're going to charge you a big chunk of money, and it's not going to be legit. And there's no reason to buy the show on DVD if it's not legit, in my opinion at least. If you just really want an illegal bootleg copy of mbav on DVD, and some guy is selling it on eBay, I'm not going to tell you to not buy it, but it's just not a wise decision. You might go to jail. Imagine going to jail off of a mbav bootleg. That's how I want to go out. It's kind of insane that while we were creating the podcast, the TV show review podcast for mbav, halfway through us creating that podcast, the show got removed from Netflix. Luckily, we were able to like continue, obviously, because I had all of season 1 and the movie on DVD, and then I have digital copies in really high quality of season 2, plus the movie in season 1 as well. And those copies were given to me by my friend Anakin, former research assistant, and they used those copies to upload all of them to YouTube. So the show is available to watch for free on YouTube, but for some reason that makes it even less accessible, because when you look up the show, that doesn't immediately come up, sadly. So I'll constantly still see people saying stuff like, where's the show to watch? I can't find it on any streaming service. And it's like, it's on YouTube. So, just get the word out there. Ethan's Upload channel, check it out. Speaking of the podcast, it was something that like I tried not to mention too much in the modern day because like I thought that no one would care anymore, but apparently people are still constantly going back and listening to those episodes and like, listening to the podcast, and I guess that's pretty cool. Like, I'm happy about that. I'm really glad that people are able to enjoy the show, the podcast that we did, because it was done at such a particular moment in all of our lives, both Sal, Shy, and me. And I mean, famously, we watched the show and recorded the podcast in the order of the production order, because we were just going off of the order that was on Netflix. Because even though I knew, well, first of all, I still had the false thought that there were two different broadcast orders for Disney Channel and Teletoon, which is not true. So I was like, well, which one would we pick then if we were to pick a broadcast order? That's why I just thought production order was going to be the most simple. But I did know that there was a different order other than the version on Netflix. But I was just running under the assumption that a majority of people who have ever seen the show ever watched it on Netflix, which, may or may not be true. It's more likely that a good chunk of people actually did watch the show on Disney Channel and then like later went on to watch it on Netflix. But the production order is seen as the most true order of the show, just purely based off the fact for the past 9 years before it got removed from Netflix, it was, that was the way people watched it. And my theory on the reason why it got removed literally the same month as the 10-year anniversary of the show originally airing the finale, because the finale aired in October of 2012 and it got removed from Netflix in October of 2022. My theory on that is because they just like signed a 9-10-year contract, and whoever owns the rights to mbav just like didn't care to renew the contract, and it just kind of expired and then it got ripped from Netflix. But anyways, we're moving on from broadcast and stuff. The third thing I wanted to mention that I only, again, briefly like touched on but never like fully emphasized was the fact that Degrassi is like a huge part of mbav. Famously, like the Canadian television scene just has like only 5 actors, and in every single show they're just like shuffling around the same 5 actors for every project. So a good chunk of like the side like characters and like background cast have been on Degrassi. Famously, the characters who played Jakeward and Rochelle in the like Dusk Twilight parody, those are 2 pretty famous Degrassi characters. And Dave Stokowski is the most famous. The actor played Craig Manning on Degrassi, and he was like a pretty big main character. I would argue like the face of Degrassi in the early years at least. And I'm almost certain that Vanessa Morgan, who plays Sarah, was on Degrassi. I can't remember exactly. But anyways, yes, that's like a smaller point that I wanted to mention, that like Degrassi exists and mbav is essentially just like a Degrassi spin-off show because of how many actors have crossed over onto both. It's pretty funny. Anyways, the last thing I wanted to mention, which I probably should have mentioned before the Degrassi thing, because like it makes the most sense. Maybe I'll edit the order of these differently. But one of the big things I wanted to mention was the idea of a double season order for season 2. So there are like gurglings of whispers of ideas that it's possible that season 2 was supposed to be a double order. I'm pretty sure it was Mike Kiss running his mouth on the Facebook group page that confirmed this, or like started this rumor. I'm gonna have to ask Anakin. I'm gonna message Anakin tomorrow and be like, hey, could you find that post please? Or, can you help me look for it? Because I'm definitely gonna look after I record this. But as far as I'm aware, there are rumors that season 2 was supposed to be 26 episodes instead of 13. Now, this makes sense for multiple reasons. A lot of these shows, a lot of these networks try to get as many episodes, squeeze as many episodes out of the production team as possible with paying the least amount of money. Famously, this is something that Nickelodeon did all the time, like for shows like iCarly or Victorious. For the second season, they would, order 12 episodes for a second season. And then all of a sudden they'd be like, actually, instead of 12 episodes for season 2, we need 24. So then all of a sudden, in the same amount of time, as far as I'm aware, they would have to create double the amount of episodes. And this was just a way to pay everybody less, because if you renew the show for a third season, people are going to want to renegotiate their contracts because clearly the show is popular, so they should deserve to get paid more. But if you just create 2 seasons worth of episodes in one season and then split it up and air it as 2 separate seasons, then you only had to pay all the actors the same amount of money. Disney Channel did a very different thing, which I would argue is a little bit more slimy and confusing for audience members, and that was essentially create spin-off shows. My mbav wallpaper went dark. Come back. I don't know why it's so pixely. It just got extremely pixelated one day, and I've just been too lazy to change it to the high def version again. For shows like The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, after the 3rd season, the actors were willing to continue on for many more seasons afterwards and become one of the longest running Disney Channel shows of all time. But instead, they ended The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and they created the spin-off of The Sweet Life on Deck. And all they do is they change the title of the show and they build a new set and they demolish the old one. But they keep everybody the exact same and just everything's the exact same. It's just that we're pretending that it's a new season of a spin-off of a TV show. And that's because if The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody were to get a 4th season, then again, all of the actors would want to get paid more because they're on a very successful TV show that's making the network a lot of money. But if they're all of a sudden getting recast for the 1st season of a brand new television show, then their salaries are that of a show that only has 1 season. So very, very slimy way to get around money. Anyways, this is a video about My Babysitter's a Vampire. I'm almost certain that the network wanted to do this with mbav and wanted to order a double season order where they were having to make 26 episodes for season 2, and then we're either going to chop it in half and air it as 2 separate seasons or just air it as a long 2nd season. But I would argue that very, very early on in season 2's production, they canceled the 26 episode idea and then limited it to 13. Now, another theory I have of mine, we're getting a bit crackpot here, guys, so, stick with me on this. But my theory is that they were going to do 2 separate, season storylines because they probably thought that they couldn't sustain a full storyline for a whole 26 episodes, which is a good impulse, in my opinion, for this hypothetical situation. So the 2-parter Lucifractor storyline was supposed to be a mid-season finale instead of a full season finale, which I would argue would really have helped the whole, cliffhanger thing. I think it's very possible, and something that rebuts against my idea that early on they were told they're not getting 26 episodes, they're getting 13, is the fact that they stuck with the cliffhanger 2-parter. And that they didn't try to rework it to kind of be more conclusive once they were told it's going to be a season finale instead of a mid-season finale. The other theory is that, okay, they decided to stick with the cliffhanger ending because they thought that there's no way the network would ever cancel a show that had such an unsatisfying cliffhanger like that. And yeah, of course they did, because, this is the industry we're talking about here, But I did talk about that idea of things in my previous mbav video, so. I know for shows like Teen Wolf that have done this, where they've ordered a double season. I think it was season 3 of Teen Wolf, if I'm remembering correctly. And they did 2 different story arcs, so most of the fans and the creators consider it season 3A and season 3B. I know for a lot of fans, that's their favorite season of the show, and that kind of storyline, that kind of structure worked really well. So I think it could have worked really well for My Babysitter's a Vampire. Or maybe they would have split it up into season 2 and season 3, so then everything after the 2-parter finale would have been season 3, but they would have actually been able to make it because it would have been in the season 2 production order. So either way, there was a lot of mismanaging happening and a lot of issues with money that caused mbav's demise. And I think one of the questions we should be asking, we really should be asking, instead of why is there no season 3, I really think the true 2 questions we should be asking is, when did season 3 not become viable anymore? And when did the team pivot to pitching a movie instead? Because I think those are much more interesting questions. My personal fan theory is January of 2013, because there's no way you go, 4 months? January. 3 months. I know my months. God. There's no way you go 3 months without confirming a third season, without knowing that there's going to be some issues to get that season out. Because usually you announce when you're renewing the show for another season, like pretty soon after the season finale, because, you want it to be included with the fan hype for them to get hyped for the new season. So the fact that they had waited past December to announce that the show had been renewed means that there were some issues. And I would argue that January was when the new quarter or the new trimester started, and they were like, yeah, no. Yeah, no, this is rough. And that's when I would say they pivoted to the idea of pushing a movie and making a movie to conclude the storyline instead. But by that point, it had been so many months, I would argue that some of the actors were like, hey, I've already booked another job for another TV show, and that's going to be really successful. It wasn't. I'm shading Farticus Mitchell right now. And there's no way Teletoon would ever actually want to go for that unless they had some other form of funding to pay for it. That's my opinion. And the fact that there's not even a whisper of an idea of Disney Channel wanting to pick it up for another season is a travesty, because I don't think Disney Channel fucking cares if the storyline is bad. I mean, they made 4 seasons of Hannah Montana. That was me shading Hannah Montana, first of all. And second of all, technically there are only 3 seasons of Hannah Montana, and then there's 1 season of Hannah Montana Forever. Because yeah, they did that slimy spin-off season thing for 1 fucking season. You couldn't pay for 1 more season of Hannah Montana? You're probably the most successful show of all time for them? What assholes, man. Anyways, that's it. That's it for now. Maybe I'll make another one of these. If you guys can leave some questions. I would love to do a mbav Q&A maybe. If you have some questions you want to ask me about the show, about My Babysitter's a Vampire, leave it in the comments below, and I'll answer them in another video eventually. Maybe I'll make a post on Tumblr as well, when I can get some asks in and I can flesh out a full video. But yeah, that's all. Bye. Second channel? Yeah. Bye, second channel.